It was the second week of October, 1989. A quiet hollow in western Pennsylvania, where the maples had already gone the color of rust and the school bus ran the same 11 miles it had run for 20 years. That afternoon, a 47-year-old driver named Raymond Kessler pulled out of the Bell Hollow school lot with 6 children aboard. The bus never reached the first stop. No wreckage, no tire marks, no bodies. 40 tons of yellow steel and 6 small backpacks vanished without a trace, and the case quickly went cold. 27 years later, one small detail, a number stamped into a steel frame rail, reopened everything. And it revealed a truth no one was prepared for. If you appreciate stories told carefully and told all the way to the end, take 1 second to like this video and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel keep going. Now, let's get into today's case. Bell Hollow wasn't a town. It was a road with a name. 11 miles of cracked asphalt running north out of Braddock Falls, Pennsylvania, following a creek that had no official name either. People called it the Kettle Run because of the old limestone quarry at the bottom of the grade, a water-filled pit so deep and so green that kids swore it had no floor. In 1989, the hollow held maybe 60 households, dairy families who had stopped milking, men who drove to the tube mill in Aliquipa, a church, a fire hall, a general store with 2 gas pumps, and a hand-lettered sign that said, "We have worms." Raymond Kessler had lived there his entire life. He was 47 years old that autumn, a wide, soft-shouldered man, with a gray brush cut and reading glasses he was always losing. He'd driven Bus 4 for 19 years. In the winter, he plowed for the township. In the summer, he mowed the cemetery for free because his parents were in it. He was not an interesting man, and he would have been the first to tell you so. But the children on his route loved him, in the specific way children love an adult who was completely predictable. He kept a coffee can of peppermints in the coin tray, and every kid got one on Friday, no exceptions, not even the ones who'd been yelling. He hummed while he drove, badly, always the same 2 songs, always off key. He had a rule that nobody was allowed to be sad on the bus, which was a stupid rule, and the kids knew it was a stupid rule, and it worked anyway. When Angela Sarto's grandmother died, Ray drove the route with the radio off and let her sit in the seat behind him, and he didn't say one word about it, and she never forgot that. He had a wife, Deborah, who cut hair in their kitchen, and he had a daughter. Nora Kessler was 9 years old in October of 1989. Skinny, sunburnt, a front tooth coming in crooked. She rode Bus 4 because everyone in the hollow rode Bus 4. And she pretended fiercely that the driver was not her father. She sat 4 rows back. She called him Mr. Kessler out loud and Dad only in the driveway. He thought this was the funniest thing that had ever happened to him. Every morning, he waited at the bottom of their gravel lane with the door folded open and the engine idling. And every morning he said the same thing when she climbed the steps. "Morning, ma'am." "Morning," she'd say, chin up, ears burning. That was their whole relationship, and it was enough. The 6 children who boarded Bus 4 on the afternoon of Thursday on October 12, 1989, were these. Kelly Dorn, 11, who wanted to be a veterinarian and carried a spiral notebook of dog breeds. Her brother Nathan Dorn, 8, who followed her everywhere and hated it when anyone pointed that out. Michael Pruitt, 7, called Mikey, who had lost both front teeth in the same week and was delighted about it. Angela Sarto, 12, the oldest, already tall, already tired of being the oldest. Denny Vosberg, 9, who could name every truck on the road by its grill. And Ruth Ann Fike, 6, in her first year of riding a bus at all, who held the seat rail with both hands the entire trip because her mother had told her to, and she was a girl who did what she was told. 6 kids. 1 driver, 11 miles. It should have been the least remarkable 40 minutes in Beaver County. Nora was not on the bus that afternoon. That single fact would define the next 27 years of her life. She'd woken up that Thursday with a sore throat and a temperature of 99.4. And her mother had kept her home, and she had spent the day on the couch watching game shows and feeling like she was getting away with something. She remembered the specific texture of that morning for the rest of her life. The wool blanket, the smell of perm solution from the kitchen, her father's boots on the porch at 6:40. He'd stuck his head in the door before he left. "You gonna live?" "Probably." "Don't get better too fast. They'll make you go tomorrow." That was the last conversation she ever had with him. She was 9. She didn't look up from the television. She thought about that for the next 27 years, every single day, the way you'd think about a splinter you couldn't reach. Here's the part that mattered later, though. Here's the part investigators would circle and underline, and eventually build an entire national manhunt around. In the 3 weeks before October 12th, something had been wrong with Ray Kessler. Deborah noticed it first. He'd stopped humming. He was sleeping badly. She'd wake at 2 in the morning and find the bed empty and him standing in the kitchen in the dark, not eating, not drinking, just standing there with his hands on the counter. He'd started taking the long way home from the bus garage, adding 20 minutes for no reason he could explain. And there was money. On September 22nd, Ray withdrew $800 from the credit union in Braddock Falls. He did not tell his wife. On October 3rd, he withdrew another $400. On October 9th, 3 days before the disappearance, he cashed a check for $650, and the teller later remembered that his hands were shaking when he signed it. $1,850. Gone. No one ever found where it went. He'd also had a fight. Nobody knew about what. But on the Saturday before, Vern Pruitt, Mikey's father, a man Ray had known since 2nd grade, came up the Kessler driveway at 9 at night, and the two of them stood out by the pole barn for 40 minutes in the dark. And voices got raised, and Vern drove off without saying goodbye to anyone. Deborah asked about it. Ray said, "It's nothing. It's handled." Something felt wrong. Really wrong. She told him so. She said it in exactly those words, standing at the sink on the Wednesday night, October 11th, with her hands in the dishwater and her back to him. And Ray Kessler, who was a bad liar and knew it, said, "I've just got something I've got to fix, Deb. Give me till the end of the month." Then he went out to the pole barn and stayed there until after 11. 27 years later, a forensic engineer in a rented pole barn outside Muncie, Indiana, would look at those 3 withdrawals on a photocopied bank statement and say the only honest thing anyone ever said about them. That's a man with a problem. It's not evidence of anything else. But in 1989, in a county with no idea what had happened to 6 of its children, $1,850 was not a problem. It was a motive. It didn't make sense. It just didn't. And because it didn't make sense, people made it make sense the fastest way they could. It rained on October 12th, 1989. Not hard. A steady, gray, all-day rain. The kind that turns the hollow road into a black mirror and pulls the last of the leaves down in wet clumps. 49 degrees, the kind of afternoon where the headlights come on at 3. School let out at 3:05. The Bell Hollow Elementary lot was a loop of cracked concrete behind the gym. 4 buses staged there in a line. Bus 4 was third. A 1984 Ward body on an international chassis. 183,000 miles on it. A dent in the right rear quarter that Ray had put there himself, backing into a fence post in 1986 and had never lived down. Marjorie Culp, a fourth-grade teacher on afternoon duty, watched the buses load from under the awning. She would be interviewed 11 separate times over the next 4 years, and her account never changed once. She saw 6 children board bus 4. She saw Ray Kessler standing at the bottom of the steps in a green rain jacket, counting them with his finger the way he always did, touching the air above each head. She saw him fold the door shut. She saw the bus pull out at 3:12, third in line, tail lights smeared in the wet, and turn north onto Hollow Road. And that was it. That was the last confirmed sighting of Raymond Kessler and 6 children by any adult in the world. The first stop on the route was the Vosburg place, 2.1 miles up the hollow. Denny's mother, Sharon Vosburg, was on her porch at 3:20 with a cigarette because the bus was always there at 3:22 and she liked to have it finished before he got off. At 3:35, she was still on the porch. At 3:50, she called the school. At 4:15, she called the state police. At 5:40, with the light going, Trooper Aldo Renk drove the full 11 miles of Hollow Road at 15 miles an hour with his spotlight on. He drove it northbound, and then he turned around at the top and drove it southbound. 11 miles each way, 2 hours, nothing. No bus, no debris, no skid marks, no broken guardrail, no flattened brush, no fresh gouges in the shoulder. It had been raining all day, which meant the ground was soft, which meant a 40,000-pound vehicle leaving that road should have left a scar you could see from a helicopter. There was no scar. There was one thing, though. One small detail that Rank wrote in his notebook that night and never stopped thinking about. 2.4 miles up the hollow, on the northbound shoulder, in the gravel, there was a broad, shallow smear of disturbed stone, about 30 feet long. It could have been a truck pulling off. It could have been the township grader. It could have been nothing at all. It was raining, and it was filling with water, while he stood over it with a flashlight. He photographed it anyway. 4 exposures, on a rainy shoulder, in the dark, because he was a thorough man, and he had nothing else. Those 4 photographs would sit in a cardboard box in an evidence annex in Newcastle for 27 years. They were the only physical evidence that ever existed in the case. And nobody would understand what they showed until 2016. By Friday morning, there were 200 people in the hollow. By Saturday, there were 900, plus a helicopter out of Pittsburgh, plus 3 television trucks parked on the fire hall lot with their masts up. It became, for about 6 weeks, the biggest story in America. A school bus, 6 children, gone in daylight on a road with one way in and one way out. Detective Sergeant Aldo Renk caught it and never put it down. He was 34 in 1989, a narrow, dark-eyed man who ate lunch standing up and wrote everything in the same brand of notebook for his entire career. By the end, he had 91 of them. He would tell you, if you asked him in the last years of his life, that Bell Hollow was not the worst case he ever worked. It was the emptiest, because there was nothing to work with. There was nothing at all. They dragged the creek, twice, from the culvert at the school all the way to the confluence. The deepest water in 11 miles was 4 feet. They brought K9 units from 3 counties. 6 dogs worked the shoulder in the rain, and 4 of them alerted at that same disturbed patch of gravel at mile 2.4, and 2 of them didn't. And the handlers argued about it for a week, and then it went into a report as inconclusive. They put divers in the kettle. This part matters. Hold on to it. The old quarry pit at the bottom of the grade was the obvious place. Everyone knew it. Deep, green, close to the road. Fenced, but not really. On Sunday, October 15th, a volunteer dive team from the Braddock Falls Fire Company went into that water in wetsuits at 51 degrees and worked it in a grid for 6 hours. They found a refrigerator, a truck axle, and about 400 beer cans. They did not find a bus. They wrote it off. They wrote off the one place the bus had actually been. And one of the divers that day, one of the young men who came up out of that green water shaking his head, who sat on a tailgate afterward with a blanket around his shoulders while a news camera filmed him, who volunteered for the second shift and the third shift, and every shift after that, was a 24-year-old named Calvin Sheeter. Remember him? Meanwhile, the investigation went where investigations go when there is no evidence. It went to the driver. They found the withdrawals within 9 days. $1,850, unexplained. They found the argument with Vern Pruitt, and Vern refused to say what it had been about, which he had every right to do, and which looked exactly as bad as you would expect. They found that Ray had asked the bus garage foreman about how the transponder works on the two-way, which was an ordinary question that a mechanic remembered wrong 9 weeks later as, how do you shut off the two-way? They found that Raymond Kessler had, in 1971, been arrested after a bar fight in Rochester, Pennsylvania. Charges dropped. That was the entire criminal history of a man who had driven school children for 19 years. It was enough. On November 2nd, 1989, the Pennsylvania State Police named Raymond Kessler as the sole suspect in the disappearance of 6 children. On November 3rd, his face was on the front page of every paper in 3 states. On November 6th, someone drove past the Kessler house at 2 in the morning and put a deer slug through the front window, 18 inches above the couch where Nora Kessler was sleeping. They moved out that week. Deborah and Nora went to Deborah's sister's place in Elwood City. Nora finished 4th grade in a school where she told everyone her last name was Petrosky. The FBI ran it as an abduction. There were sightings, 341 of them, eventually. A yellow bus in Tennessee. A man matching Kessler at a truck stop outside Amarillo. A little girl who might have been Ruth Ann Fike in a Kmart in Ohio, who turned out to be a little girl in a Kmart in Ohio. Every one of them was chased. Every one of them was nothing. The theory hardened into concrete. Ray Kessler had taken the money, taken the bus, taken the children, and driven them out of the state and out of the story, for reasons that were dark and specific, and would come out eventually. They never came out, because they were never there. By the spring of 1991, the task force was 2 men. By 1993, it was Rank alone, working it around everything else. The case went cold, not dramatically, not all at once, but the real way. The way a house goes cold after the power's cut, slowly, from the outside in. 27 years is not a montage, but it has to be told like one, because that is how it felt from inside. In 1990, the Bell Hollow 6 Foundation was founded in the basement of the Methodist Church by Eileen Dorn, who had lost 2 children on that bus. Kelly, 11. Nathan, 8. She was 33 years old, a substitute teacher, and she had nothing left to do with her hands. So she built something. She built a scholarship. She built a September vigil that drew 400 people a year. She lobbied Harrisburg for 4 years, and in 1993, she got the Bell Hollow Act signed into law, a statute mandating disclosure and criminal history review for every school transportation employee in the Commonwealth. It was a good law. It probably saved children, Its findings section, the preamble, the part legislators read into the record, named Raymond Kessler. In 1994, the district consolidated, and Bell Hollow Elementary closed. In 1997, the state rerouted Highway 9, and the Hollow Road stopped being a through route. In 2001, a developer bought 400 acres at the bottom of the grade, filled the old quarry pit with 3 years of clean construction debris, capped it, and built a subdivision called Stonebridge Farms, 91 houses, curving streets, and a cul-de-sac named Quarry View Court by someone with no sense of history at all. By 2010, the community that lost those children did not exist. There were subdivisions, a consolidated district, and a rerouted road. Deborah Kessler died in March of 2003 at 59. The certificate said cardiomyopathy. Nora would tell you it said the wrong thing. Ray Kessler was declared legally dead in 1996. A small life insurance policy paid $11,000 into escrow. And Nora, then 16, refused to touch it. It sat in a credit union in Beaver County for 20 years, earning the worst interest in America. And Nora Kessler grew up. She got her GED at 19. She worked the paint counter at a hardware store in Braddock Falls and eventually managed the store. She married a man named Tom Lively in 2006 and divorced him in 2012, amicably, because she was, in her own words, not really available. She had no children. She kept her father's name, which in that county was a decision people noticed. And here is the thing that has to be said plainly, because it is the engine of everything that follows. Nora Kessler believed her father did it. Not out loud at first. Out loud she said, "I don't know." But somewhere between 14 and 20, she did the same arithmetic everyone else had done. Won the money, the fight, the sleeplessness, the fact that a man does not simply evaporate off a road he had driven 11,000 times, and she arrived where everyone else had arrived. At 19, she said it in an interview with a Pittsburgh paper. 6 sentences. She said she loved her father. She said she believed he had taken those children. She said she was sorry. That interview changed her life, because Eileen Dorn read it. 2 weeks later, Eileen Dorn walked into the hardware store and asked for Nora by name. And the two of them sat in a Ford Escort in the parking lot for 2 hours. And something started that nobody in either family understood. They were not friends. It was stranger and heavier than that. Eileen had lost 2 children to a monster. Nora was the monster's daughter who had agreed he was a monster. That agreement was the entire foundation. It was the one thing that let a grieving mother sit across from that face without hating it. For 18 years, Eileen Dorn called Nora Kessler on the 12th of October, every year. They talked 20 minutes and hung up. Nora went to the vigil 11 times and stood in the back. Eileen came to Deborah's funeral in 2003 and sat in the second row. And nobody in that church could look at her. They needed each other. They were the only 2 people alive who had built a life on the exact same sentence. Ray Kessler took those children. Neither of them ever imagined what it would cost when that sentence turned out to be false. On April 9, 2016, a collector vehicle auction house in Wooster, Ohio, ran an estate consignment sale. Lot 214 was a 1984 International school bus converted to a camper. Interior gutted and rebuilt in pine, a propane stove, a queen bed over the rear axle. Painted soft cream with a green stripe. It had belonged to a retired couple named the Ackermans out of Hancock County, West Virginia, who had driven it to 41 states and then died within 18 months of each other. And their kids didn't want it. It was a nice bus. It sold for $9,400 to a man from Michigan. And it triggered nothing at all. because here is what actually broke this case open. And it is the least dramatic thing in the entire story. In January of 2016, that auction house changed its intake procedure. An insurance requirement. Every titled vehicle over 25 years old now got photographed at 4 points, including a wire-brushed shot of the chassis frame stamping the number pressed into the steel rail at the factory, which is not the number on the door plate, and which nobody in the ordinary course of life ever looks at. An intake clerk named Devin Riggle, 22 years old, 4 months into the job, wire-brushed the right frame rail of Lot 214, photographed it and uploaded it to the National Stolen Vehicle Database, which the software does automatically, which is why the procedure existed at all. 2 days later, he got a flag. He assumed it was an error. Frame stampings flag all the time corrosion, misreads, transposed digits. He almost closed it. Then he opened the record. The record was a Pennsylvania State Police bulletin. It had been entered on October 17, 1989. It had not been viewed by a human being since a records migration in 1994. It described a 1984 Ward School bus body. District 47, Bell Hollow, Beaver County, Pennsylvania. Devin Riggle sat in a metal building in Wooster, Ohio, and read the words 6 juvenile occupants on a computer screen, and his blood ran cold. He called his manager. His manager called the Ohio State Highway Patrol. Ohio called Pennsylvania. And on April 21, 2016, a trooper knocked on the door of a rented half-double in Braddock Falls and told a 36-year-old hardware store manager that they had found her father's bus. Nora Kessler stood in the doorway in a work polo with a box cutter still clipped to her belt. The first thing she said was he in it? The trooper said no. The second thing she said flat, with no hope in it at all, was, then where did he drive it to? The Pennsylvania State Police held the bus for 6 weeks. They processed it the way you process a vehicle in 2016. Full interior strip, chemical luminescence, swabs, alternate light. It was thorough, and it was professional, and it produced absolutely nothing. And the reason it produced nothing was not a cover-up. It was that the bus had been gutted to bare metal in 2004 by a retired postal carrier from West Virginia who wanted to build a camper. And everything that had ever been inside it had gone into a dumpster in Weirton. But the paperwork is the part that broke people's brains. Because the title chain was clean, perfectly, boringly clean. The bus had been titled continuously since March of 1990 under a VIN belonging to a 1984 International that had been scrapped at Sheeter Aggregate in Beaver County. Sold that spring legally with a bill of sale to a congregation in Follinsby, West Virginia, which used it for 11 years to haul youth groups. Sold in 2001 to a hunting club in Tucker County. Sold in 2004 to Harold and Jean Ackerman, who converted it, insured it, registered it, inspected it annually, and drove it to the Grand Canyon twice. 4 owners, 26 years. Church parking lots, campgrounds, state inspection stations, a photograph of it in the background of a Christmas card. Nobody had hidden that bus. Nobody had even tried. The most searched-for object in the history of Beaver County had spent 27 years registered, insured, inspected, and driven in daylight on public roads under a dead bus's name. That was the impossible thing. Not that it was hidden, that it wasn't. Detective Rank was 81 years old in 2016 in a care facility in Erie on oxygen. 2 investigators drove up to show him the auction photographs. He looked at the cream paint and the green stripe for a long time And then he said one sentence that ended up in the final report. It was never gone. We were just looking for the wrong color. He died in November of that year. He got to see about half of it. Meanwhile, the man from Michigan who had bought lot 214 for $9,400 wanted nothing further to do with it. The auction house unwound the sale. In July, the bus went back on the block as an insurance release lot. Cream paint, green stripe, no reserve. In a yard in Worcester with a state police evidence tag, still zip-tied to the mirror. Nora Kessler drove 3 hours and bought it for $6,100. She paid for it with her father's death benefit, $11,000 that had sat untouched in a credit union since 1996 because she could not stand to spend money the world had given her for a man she believed was a child killer. She spent it on this. And here is what has to be understood about that decision. Because it is the strangest thing in this entire case, and the thing that makes it what it is. She did not buy that bus to prove her father was innocent. She bought it to find out what he had done. She told the man at the auction office exactly that. And he wrote it down later in a statement because it was such an odd thing to hear. She said, "There's a reason he did it. I've waited 27 years to know the reason. I'll take whatever it is." Something felt wrong, really wrong, and she had spent her entire adult life assuming she already knew what. Wendell Fry was 68 years old and worked out of a rented pole barn on a gravel lot outside Muncie, Indiana. For 31 years, he had done collision reconstruction for insurance carriers, the man they hired, when 2 trucking companies were suing each other over $11 million, and somebody had to prove what direction a vehicle had actually been traveling. He had testified in 460 depositions. He had a heat gun, a bandsaw, a hardness tester, a paint microscope, and a habit of not speaking for 4 or 5 minutes at a stretch. He charged $180 an hour. And he told Nora Kessler on the phone that this would cost her somewhere between $8,000 and $14,000 and that he could not promise her a single thing. She said okay. He asked her what she wanted. She said, "I want to know what actually happened to that vehicle. Not what happened to my dad, to the vehicle." Fry said later that it was the best instruction a client had ever given him. On August 2nd, 2016, the bus went up on stands in the pole barn, and Wendell Fry wrote 6 lines on a whiteboard in blue marker. Those 6 lines are the reason this case got solved. Driven away intact flight/abduction by driver taken by third-party hijack at gunpoint, submerged accidental water loss, later salvage staged insurance/debt scheme, occupants relocated, stripped and sold, vehicle theft, occupants separate event unknown event, plus post-event human interference. "We don't add," he told her. Everybody who ever worked this case added. They kept finding new things that could be true. We're going to subtract. We are going to kill these one at a time until there's one left. And then we're going to try very hard to kill that one too. She asked how long. He said, "Metal doesn't get tired, and it doesn't lie, and it doesn't change its story to be kind to you. Sit down." Buses carry a hubidometer, a small mechanical counter bolted to the wheel hub that counts axle revolutions for maintenance records. It cannot be reset. It is not the dashboard odometer. On Bus 4, it had been buried under 27 years of undercoating and 4 repaints. And nobody had ever touched it because nobody knew it was there. Fry cut it free and read it under magnification. The district's fuel log had the bus at a known reading on the morning of October 12, 1989. Somebody had photocopied that log into the case file in 1990. And nobody had ever looked at it again because it was a fuel log. The difference between that morning's number and the number on the hub was 3.1 miles. 3.1. Not 11, not 400, not Amarillo, not Tennessee, not a truck stop in Texas. Ray Kessler drove that bus 3.1 miles from the school, and it never moved again under its own power for 11 days. Nora Kessler sat down on an upturned bucket in an Indiana pole barn and did not say anything for a long time. The first stop on the route was at 2.1 miles. Mile 2.4, the disturbed gravel Aldo Rank had photographed in the rain, was 3/10 past it. Lines 2 and 5 died in the same afternoon on the frame. Fry stripped the underside to bare steel and measured the chassis in a laser jig. And what he found was not subtle. The right side frame rail had been driven inboard 4 1/4 inches at a point just behind the front axle, then partially pulled back out. Both rear spring hangers were sheared and re-welded. The body-to-chassis mounts on the right side had all failed in the same direction at the same time. That is not theft. That is not a hijacking. That is a massive lateral impact from the right side, followed by a roll. Something hit this bus, Fry said. Hard. And then somebody straightened it. Line 4 died on the seat anchors. The passenger seats were long gone, but their mounting feet had been sheared off at floor level and the stumps ground flush and covered by 2004 plywood. Fry cut a floor section and put it under the microscope. 7 seat frames had failed forward. Not sideways, not by corrosion, not by removal. Forward, the specific ductile tearing a seat leg does when a mass is thrown against it in a deceleration event. Occupied seats, loaded seats. There is no gentle way to say what that meant, and Fry did not try. He said, "They were in it. They were in it when it happened." Nora went outside and stood in the gravel for 20 minutes. Line 3 died in the crevices. Fry vacuumed 61 grams of packed sediment out of the frame boxes, the cross-member seams, the places nothing ever cleans. He sent it to a geology lab at a university in Ohio. The result came back as high-purity crushed limestone fines with a specific magnesium signature and a trace of blasting residue nitrate. Not creek silt, not river sand, not a lake bottom. Quarry water. Fresh-cut limestone quarry water from a working or recently worked pit. And there had been exactly one of those within 3.1 miles of the Bell Hollow School in 1989. The kettle. The pit that divers had searched for 6 hours on October 15th and declared empty. They had been right. It was empty by then. And then there was the paint. This is the image that ended up in every newspaper in the country. And it is a photograph of a piece of metal the size of a postage stamp. Fry cut a coupon from an interior wheel arch, a spot no restorer ever bothers with, and sanded it at a shallow angle, so that each layer of paint appeared as a distinct band, like rock strata in a road cut. From the outside in, Ackerman Cream, 2004. Hunting Club Flat Green, 2001. Church White, 1990. A gray oxide primer. And under the primer, a stripe of school bus yellow, 0.03 of an inch thick, with a hairline of raw torn steel running through it where the metal had been deformed and never fully filled. 27 years of other people's lives, stacked on top of one afternoon in October. Fry photographed it at 40 times magnification and printed it 11 by 14 and taped it to the wall above the whiteboard. And it stayed there for the rest of the job. 5 lines were dead. 1 was left, unknown event plus post-event human interference. The midpoint of this investigation was not a confession, and it was not a witness. It was arithmetic. On September 19th, Fry finished the crush and load reconstruction, the calculation that takes measured deformation, vehicle mass, and material properties and produces a range of impact speeds and directions. He ran it 3 times with different assumptions to try to break it. It would not break. The bus had been struck on the right front by a vehicle with a mass between 11 and 16 tons, traveling at a closing speed between 38 and 46 miles an hour, on a downgrade in a rightward direction relative to the bus. The bus had rotated, left the road surface, and rolled at least once and probably twice down an embankment. The deceleration at the occupant level was in the range of 50 to 70 Gs. In an unbelted 1984 school bus with compartmentalized seating designed for exactly nothing like this, that is not survivable. Not for a 12-year-old. Not for a 6-year-old holding a seat rail with both hands because her mother told her to. Fry gave that number to Nora Kessler in a Bob Evans off-route 32 at 7 in the morning because he refused to give it to her in the barn. He told her that the children on that bus had died within seconds, and that her father, in the driver's seat on the struck side, had died with them. And he told her the second half, which was the part that changed the world. 3.1 miles, all of it within 2 miles of the first stop. The largest search in Pennsylvania history had gone to 9 states and 341 sightings and 140,000 tips. And the entire event had taken place inside a 2-mile circle you could walk across in half an hour. Then, on October 4th, 2016, came the turning point. Fry had been dating the repair. Welds carry a signature rod chemistry, bead profile, the specific alloy of the era. He pulled samples from the re-welded spring hangers and the frame pull and had them run against reference standards. And he cross-checked the replacement parts. A right front leaf pack, a steering box, a windshield frame section, a section of right side body sheet. The steering box had a casting date code. The windshield frame had a supplier stamp. The body sheet was a 1980s production panel that had been cut from another vehicle rather than bought new. And the leaf pack was a warranty exchange unit whose serial ran through a parts distributor in Pittsburgh, a distributor whose 1989 sales microfiche was still, improbably, in a storage unit in Carnegie, because the company had never thrown anything away in its life. Invoice number 88-40771. Sold October 23, 1989. Cash, counter pickup. 11 days after 6 children disappeared. 11 days into a search with 900 volunteers, a helicopter, 3 television networks, and dive teams in the water. Somebody had stood at a parts counter in Pittsburgh with cash in his hand and bought the components to make that bus roadworthy again, while the entire country was looking for it. Wendell Fry called Nora at 11 at night, and she picked up on the first ring. He said, "It wasn't a crime," and then it was. Nora Kessler did not go to the state police first. She's been criticized for that. She would tell you she doesn't care. She went to the Beaver County Recorder's office on a Wednesday morning and pulled the deed history on the kettle, which took her 11 minutes and cost $4. And then she pulled the corporate filings, and then she pulled the salvage yard licensing. The quarry had been owned from 1961 to 1998 by Sheeter Aggregate, a family operation, 3 employees. The scrapped bus whose VIN plate had ridden on that chassis for 27 years had been dismantled at Sheeter Aggregate in December of 1989, and Emil Sheeter, the founder, had suffered a stroke in August of 1989 and spent that entire autumn in a rehabilitation facility in Monica, leaving the pit, the shop, the dragline, and the gate keys in the hands of his 24-year-old son. Calvin Sheeter was 51 years old in 2016. He was the chief of the Braddock Falls Volunteer Fire Company. He had been for 19 years. He was a township supervisor. He was a deacon at the Methodist Church, where the Bell Hollow 6 Foundation had been founded in a basement in 1990. He had never married. He lived in his father's house. He had personally driven the foundation's donation van since 2004. He had spent 11 of his own weekends building the memorial garden behind the old fire hall, the one with the 6 river stones in a half circle, and the foundation had never been able to identify the anonymous donor who had covered the granite. He had been in the water on October 15th, 1989. He had been on the dive team. He had gone back in for the second shift and the third. He was, by absolutely every account, the finest man in that township. Nora drove out to the fire hall on a Saturday in October of 2016 and found him alone in the bay, changing the oil on engine 2, on his back on a creeper with a work light hanging off the bumper. She said his name. He rolled out from under the truck. And here is the detail that everyone who reads the transcript stops on, because Nora Kessler described it in a deposition 8 months later, and her description never varied. He looked at her face, and he did not ask who she was. He had known who she was for 27 years. She told him she had bought her father's bus. She told him about the hubodometer, and the frame, and the seat anchors, and the limestone fines with the magnesium signature, and the leaf pack sold for cash at a counter in Pittsburgh on the 23rd of October, 1989. She did not accuse him of anything. She said she was there because the geology pointed at his family's pit, and she wanted to know if his father had ever mentioned anything. Calvin Sheeter wiped his hands on a red shop rag for a very long time. Then he said, "Can I have until Monday?" Her blood ran cold, because that is not what an innocent man says. An innocent man says, what? An innocent man says, my father. An innocent man says, I don't understand. She said, until Monday, for what? And he said, to tell it right. I've had it written for a while. At 6:40 on the morning of Monday, October 17th, 2016, Calvin Sheeter drove himself to the state police barracks at Brighton Township in his own truck, parked legally, walked to the desk, and handed the trooper on duty a 9-page handwritten statement in a manila envelope. He waived counsel. He never withdrew a word of it. It is not a confession that reframes anything as love. It is not a sacrifice, and it is not a rescue, and there is nothing noble in it, anywhere. It is 9 pages, about 11 days. On the afternoon of October 12th, 1989, Calvin Sheeter was 24 years old and was driving his father's tandem-axle quarry truck loaded with 22 tons of crushed limestone. He did not have the license class to drive it. The truck's brakes were out of adjustment, and he knew it, because his father had been in a rehab facility for 2 months, and the maintenance had not been done, and there was a delivery that had to go out because there was a payment due. He came down the Vetter grade in the rain at somewhere over 40. He wrote that he did not see the bus until the bend. He wrote that he stood on the brake and the pedal went soft and long. The truck struck the right front of bus 4 and pushed it laterally off the road at mile 2.4, through the shoulder gravel, down the embankment, and into the flooded pit. 900 people spent 6 weeks looking for the smallest sign that a vehicle had left that road, and the sign was 30 feet of disturbed gravel that a state trooper photographed in the dark 4 hours later and could never make anything of. Calvin Sheeter wrote that he got down the bank. He wrote that the water was already closed over it. He wrote 3 sentences about what he could see and could not reach, and then he stopped writing about it and never wrote about it again. Then he wrote this, and this is the sentence that ended his life as everyone had understood it. I did not call anybody. I got back in the truck and I finished the delivery. He was 24. He was uninsured for that vehicle. He was unlicensed for it. He had 2 months of unpaid invoices in a drawer and a father who could not speak in a facility in Monaca, and no mother, and no brother, and no one at all. He wrote that he told himself he would call in the morning. Then in the morning, it was on the television, and it was 6 children, and there was a helicopter, and by then, he had not called for 14 hours. And after 14 hours, there is no version of calling that is not also confessing to every hour you did not call. So, he did the other thing. Over 11 nights, alone, with his father's dragline and winch and shop, he brought that bus up out of the water. He removed what was inside it. He buried them in the working floor of the pit, 90 feet down, in the northeast corner. And over the following 2 years, the ordinary operation of the quarry put 40 feet of overburden on top of them. And in 2001, a developer put 50 more feet of engineered fill on top of that and built a cul-de-sac called Quarry View Court. He straightened the frame. He re-welded the spring hangers. He bought a leaf pack and a steering box and a windshield frame with cash on October 23rd. He cut a body panel off a wreck in his own yard. He primed it gray. In December, he scrapped a 1984 International and kept its VIN plate. In March of 1990, he sold a repainted white bus to a church in Follansbee, West Virginia, for $2,200, and the money went into his father's business account and paid the note. And then he was a hero for 26 years. He joined the fire company in 1991. He made chief in 1997. He never took a paycheck for anything. He gave the foundation money every year through a lawyer in Pittsburgh so that Eileen Dorn would never see his name on it. He built her memorial garden with his own hands and set the 6 river stones himself and came back every spring to weed it. He wrote on page 9, "I know what people are going to say about all of that. They are going to say it was for them. It was not. There was never one day of it that was for them. There was no trial. The vehicular homicide charges, the ones that actually described what killed 6 children and a bus driver, were time-barred. They had expired in 2001, while Calvin Sheeter was helping haul fill for a subdivision. The Commonwealth charged him with what was left: 6 counts of abuse of a corpse, tampering with physical evidence, obstruction, title fraud, and insurance fraud. The district attorney argued a continuing offense theory to hold the concealment counts alive, and won part of it and lost part of it. And in June of 2017, Calvin Sheeter pleaded guilty to 11 counts and was sentenced to 4 to 12 years in a state facility. He was 52. He did not ask for leniency. He submitted no letters of support, though 206 people sent them anyway. In April of 2017, a forensic excavation began at Quarry View Court. 2 houses were bought out and demolished. It took 19 weeks, a shoring contractor, and $1.4 million of state money. They recovered 7 sets of remains in the northeast quadrant, 91 feet down, in the position Calvin Sheeter had drawn on the back page of his statement. 6 children, 1 driver. They were identified by dental records and returned to their families in November of 2017. There was no single funeral. Each family did their own, quietly, mostly private. And the county asked the news crews to stay off the roads, and mostly they did. On October 2nd, 2017, the Pennsylvania General Assembly amended the Bell Hollow Act. The operative provisions, the background checks, the disclosure rules, the good law that had probably saved children, were left entirely intact. The findings section was struck and replaced. The name Raymond Kessler was removed from the statute books of the Commonwealth 28 years after it was put there. The state also revoked the Memorial Highway designation on the old Route 9 spur. The sign came down on a Tuesday in November. It took 2 men in a bucket truck about 20 minutes. And Eileen Dorn. This is the part nobody tells well, so it should be told plainly. She did not call on October 12, 2016. It was the first year in 18 that she did not. And Nora sat with her phone on the kitchen table until midnight anyway. She did not attend the sentencing. She did not give a victim statement. She resigned from the foundation she had built in a church basement in 1990 and did not explain why. And the foundation, without her, folded inside a year. 27 years of a woman's life had been constructed on one sentence. And a stranger in Indiana had proved the sentence false with a microscope and a fuel log. Everything she had built was still standing. The law was still good. The scholarship had still sent 41 kids to school. But the foundation under all of it had been a man named Raymond Kessler, and he had turned out to be the seventh victim. There was no reconciliation scene. There was no phone call where two women wept and forgave each other. That is not what happened, and it would be a lie to pretend otherwise. What happened was this. In September of 2018, Nora Kessler received a large envelope with no letter in it. Inside was a printed program for a vigil that no longer had an organization behind it, held in the memorial garden behind the old fire hall. Attendance about 30. Under the heading, where there had been 6 names every year since 1990, there were 7. The 7th was her father's. That was all. There was no note. There has never been a note. Nora keeps it in a drawer. And when people ask her whether she forgave Eileen Dorn, she says that Eileen Dorn never did anything to her, and that this is the whole problem. And then she changes the subject. The bus was released from evidence in 2019 and crushed at a yard in Beaver Falls, because there was no museum that wanted it, and no family that could look at it, and no version of keeping it that was not obscene. Before it went, Wendell Fry cut one more coupon out of the interior wheel arch and mailed it to Nora in a coin envelope. It sits on her windowsill in Braddock Falls. 2 inches of steel, sanded at a shallow angle, 4 bands of other people's ordinary lives, cream, green, white, gray, and underneath all of it, a thin, bright line of school bus yellow with a hairline of torn metal running through it. That is the whole case, in something you could hold in your palm. Nora Kessler still manages a hardware store. She gave one interview in 2019 and has given none since. Asked what she wanted people to take from it, she said she didn't know that she wanted them to take anything. And then she said one more thing. And it's the line the reporter led with. For 27 years, everybody in this county knew what happened, including me. That's what I can't get past. Not that they lied. Nobody lied. They just knew. People like to say that in the end, love proves stronger than the darkness. Sometimes it does. In Bell Hollow, it wasn't love that finally moved. It was a fuel log, a hubidometer, 61 grams of limestone dust, and a 22-year-old clerk in Ohio who ran a wire brush over a frame rail because his job told him to. Nobody in this story was rescued. Nobody came home alive. There was no reunion at the end of it, and the man who ran that road did not turn out to be a hero any more than he turned out to be a monster. He turned out to be exactly what he had always been. When a slow, ordinary man with reading glasses he was always losing, who counted 6 heads with his finger in the rain, and folded the door shut and drove 3.1 miles. We tell ourselves that the truth cannot stay buried forever, and that's a comfortable thing to believe. But the truth in Bell Hollow was not buried by a villain. It was buried by 90 feet of ordinary fill, by a good law with a bad preamble, by a grieving town that needed somewhere to put the weight, and by 27 years of decent people being completely, sincerely, unanimously wrong. That's the part worth sitting with, not the 11 nights, not the drag line. The 27 years afterward when nobody was hiding anything at all, And the answer was driving around in daylight painted a different color. And all it needed was for one person to stop looking for who to blame and start asking what the metal remembered. Ray Kessler's name is off the statute now. The sign came down in 20 minutes. It didn't fix anything. It wasn't supposed to. It just made the record true. And in a story like this one, that may be the only kind of justice that was ever actually available.